Hey guys, what is up? Welcome back to Creepypasta Readings, where, as the title suggests, we read a couple of creepypastas. I have another top 3 for you today. We're going to be reading stories based on terrifying experiences hitchhiking. I've also brought in Lazy Masquerade to read you one of the stories, and I'll leave a link to his channel in the description. But without further ado, let's get into today's episode of Creepypasta Readings. One Saturday, my husband and I had gone somewhere, and we saw this guy hitchhiking. I had always been taught not to pick up hitchhikers, so I sort of freaked out when my husband pulled over and picked him up. But oh well. This guy, Will, seemed okay, and he and my husband quickly became friends. He began to come over to our apartment. He and my husband liked the same kind of music, so Will became a regular visitor. Will wasn't a bad looking dude if you liked that type, and didn't mind that he lived with his grandmother and didn't seem to have a job. Nor did he seem to want one. He wore his dark brown hair long and was tan and muscular. My parents, who still lived in my hometown, had an empty house and said we could live there rent-free. So my husband and I quickly jumped at the chance. We said our goodbyes to Will and other friends from the place we had been living in and moved shortly after. A couple months after we moved, my husband came home from work one day and found Will passed out drunk in a lawn chair in our yard. So, when I arrived home from work that day, he and my husband were playing music and drinking a little. Sometime during the course of that evening, Will told us about being present at a murder just a few days before. What was weird is the way he described it. No emotion whatsoever. He said himself and 2 older guys he knew had gone to a lake to swim, and the 2 older guys had gotten into an argument, and one of them had beaten the other to death with a shovel. He said he was running to get help, and he could hear the sound of the shovel making a pinging noise. I guess if I had not been tired and maybe also quite naive, I would have been seriously creeped. Sometime during that evening, Will tried to get me to drink with him and my husband. I've never liked alcohol, so I politely refused. This is where it took a strange, swift turn. He held my head and tried to force me to drink. He did force some of it down my throat before I shoved him off me. My husband got quite angry at this, but Will insisted it was his messed up idea of a joke. After this ordeal, I decided to go to sleep, leaving my husband and Will to continue rekindling their friendship. I awakened the following morning around 6 a.m. My husband was sitting on the bed, his back leaning against the headboard, and he was wide awake and looked very alert and intent, as if he were listening for something. I asked him what was wrong, and he informed me that he had been awake for the entire night. He had his knife right beside him. He never told me the details of what happened after I went to sleep, but he was concerned that while he was sleeping, Will would try and kill him. What he did tell me was that he believed Will was actually the one who had killed that man. He also informed me that Will behaved very weirdly and threatening towards him. He believed that Will was trying to get me drunk, so I would sleep soundly while he finished off my husband. My husband was not normally paranoid like that, nor was he a jealous man, so I believed the things he said. Will slept on our couch, and the next morning, he was back to being the Will we had known before. But my husband took him someplace down the road so he could hitchhike home. He never came back to our house after that. I think he realized he had worn out his welcome.
Let me start off by saying that this isn't my tale. Believe whatever you want, but I know my dad wouldn't make this up. This is a story my dad has told me and retold me several times throughout the years. It's as creepy now as it was the first time I heard it. So here it goes. It was the early 1970s in Des Plaines, Illinois. Back then, it was not uncommon to hitchhike. My dad and his younger brother enjoyed doing this, as they were quite the adventurers. They were both pretty young, in their early teens. They had just gone fishing when they had made their way to a nearby coffee shop parking lot, in search of a ride to get close home. A middle-aged man stopped to pick them up. There was nothing particularly striking about this guy. He looked like a typical guy. So, they ended up getting into his car with him. My dad sat in the passenger seat, while my uncle sat in the middle back seat. Everything was fine, until the driver reached his arm towards the back of the car, and he put his hand on my uncle's knee. My dad's creepometer sounded right away, and as soon as they came to a stoplight, my dad got out of the car, took his brother by the arm, and got the hell out of there. Fast forward a few years. It's 1978, and my dad catches a glimpse of a familiar face in the Chicago newspaper. It's the man who had picked them up a few years back. The article states that this man was arrested after police found 33 teenage males buried in various parts of his home, including the crawl space. This sick man would find teenage boys wherever he could to rape, torture, and kill. His name was John Wayne Gacy. Needless to say, I'm happy my dad reacted as quickly as he did. My dad and uncle were the right age to be one of his victims. It's scary to think of what could have happened and how I wouldn't be here today. So, Gacy, even though you're dead now, I'm so thankful you and my dad never got to really meet.
When I was 17, I didn't have a driver's license. I walked most places, occasionally catching rides with friends, and, less occasionally, hitchhiking. The night in question was one of those seldom seen occasions when I decided to hitchhike. Now, most of the time, when I'd hitch a ride, I wouldn't get in the car with a lone man. Only women, or rarely, men with a wife, girlfriend, or kids in the car. This night, though, cars were few and far between and it was cold. And really, when this man pulled over, I took a good look and figured I could take him if he tried anything. He was on the slender side, and had a strange frailness about him even though he looked healthy enough. I got into the car after we agreed on a destination. We exchanged names and I warmed my fingers in front of the heating vent. He spoke quietly, asking a few questions along the lines of, was I a local and how did I like living here? He said he'd only been there a couple of months, but found it beautiful and hoped he could find happiness there. That comment struck me as a little odd, but I brushed it off. It began to snow, and the road quickly got slippery, so he slowed down and kept his eyes straight on the windshield, driving silently. I was okay with that, as small talk was never my forte. About 10 minutes later, I noticed a car near the intersection we were approaching seemed to be sliding, so I said, "Watch out." He immediately hit the gas, shooting through the intersection, and burst out with, "Don't ever scream at me." Needless to say, I was taken aback. I said, "Look, this is close enough. Just pull over here and I can get there." He didn't seem to hear me. Richard, did you hear me? I said you can pull over here and let me out." No response. He just stared straight ahead, driving faster now than he had been since it began to snow. To say I was scared doesn't seem to cover the depth of fear that began to arise in me. I didn't know if I should stay quiet or speak, but I was damn sure not going to yell after his outburst. After about a mile, he began to mumble under his breath. I couldn't quite make out what he was saying, but I assumed he was speaking to me. So I said, "Sorry? I couldn't hear you." He began to speak, quietly and rapidly, saying things like, "You're always yelling at me. I've told you time and time again I do not appreciate being yelled at, but do you listen? No. Well, I'm done listening to you now. Do you hear that?" I was at a complete loss. I didn't know what to say in response or if I should say anything at all. I contemplated just jumping out of the car, but nixed that idea when I realized the door lock was missing. There was just a silver-lined hole where it should have been. I'd started to cry and debate with myself about causing an accident by grabbing the wheel and hoping for the best, when he suddenly looked at me for the first time since I had gotten into the car. He blinked several times, rapidly, then slowed the car, pulling into a gas station. I waited to see if he'd unlock the doors, not wanting to say anything to set him off again. After a minute or two, he quietly said, "I think I better let you out here," and hit the button to open the locks. I wasn't about to hesitate. I jumped out of the car as if it were on fire. I was about to turn and walk into the gas station when he called my name. He looked so damn sad when I hesitated. He apologized, said he was sorry if he'd frightened me, and that he would never have harmed me, and asked if I'd be able to get home okay. After I said I would, and closed the door, he began to pull out of the gas station lot, but stopped suddenly. He just sat there for a couple of moments, his head down. I froze, wondering what the hell he was up to, and I was about to run into the station, but he opened his windows and yelled to me, waving something in his hand. My hat. I'd left it on his seat. I warily approached his side of the car, and he handed it to me, apologizing again. I didn't know what else to say, so I just said thanks. I watched as he drove off, making sure he was out of sight before moving on so he wouldn't know which direction I was heading. As I walked, I went to put my hat back on, and out of it fell a piece of paper. Folded into the paper was a $100 bill. The paper said, "I'm sorry. Please take a cab and don't hitchhike anymore tonight." I didn't. In fact, that was the last time I ever hitched a ride alone. And that's it for this episode of Creepypasta Readings. I hope you guys enjoyed, and if you did, don't forget to hit that like button. Thanks a million to Lazy Masquerade for helping out with this video. I'll leave a link in the description to his channel. I'll see you in the next video. Have a good one.